وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل Muhammad. I want to speak to you today in this gathering in particular where we're speaking about Islamic education, about the concept of Islamic literacy in general, and then specifically this effort that I've been engaged in the last couple of years. The idea behind Islamic literacy is that there is, just like in other fields of learning, we have a basic literacy that we require of all people. Our goal is to have literacy for our kids in their basic studies at school, especially in language and in mathematics and science and these sorts of studies. And so we have that as a goal, that we want them to be literate at a certain level, and then we design curricula to feed into that and get them to that level by the end of their education, whether it's high school education or beyond. We have a similar concept, and we need to make sure that we are cognizant of this similar concept in Islam, that we have a similar goal of Islamic literacy that we all need to strive for, simply to be basic card-carrying Muslims. Not scholarship, which is the work of the few to help the community at large, but rather a basic Islamic literacy. The same way I can't say that I don't know how to read as long as my boss knows how to read or someone else in my family knows how to read. That's good enough. Whenever I have to read something, I'll just ask them. They'll read it for me. Just as that's not acceptable for us anymore, the same thing goes for basic Islamic studies. That every single person is responsible on a personal basis for having literacy in certain areas of Islamic learning. What is that level of Islamic literacy? In a nutshell, it's Surah Al-Asr. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Shaykh Hamza also referred to this verse, and this is it's become the motto of Islamic literacy as an organization as well, that we have Iman and Amal Salih that are the basic components of Islamic literacy. We need to make sure that we have our basic tenets of faith clear in our minds, that we know what we believe and why we believe it as well. And then on the side of action, that we know, we have the knowledge to know what kinds of actions are required of us and what kind of a life we should live, not only in a fiqhi sense, but again, echoing what Shaykh Hamza mentioned earlier, and something that I think all of us are trying to echo, that action is not simply defined by the halals and the harams, but there's a more comprehensive and holistic way of looking at it that's more in keeping with the way the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt also talk about things. So if you open up a fiqh manual, it'll say, for instance, as-salah wajiba, it's a faridah, as-salah is wajib, and that's the end. But if you open up a book of hadith and the imams and the Prophet talking about the salah, they're not going to simply say that it's an obligation that you have. They'll say the as-salatu mi'raj al-mu'min, the hadith that Shaykh Hanif also referred to. As-salah amudud din, it's the pillar upon which everything else rests. It's the stream that flows by our house in which we can bathe 5 times a day to purify ourselves of sin, the same way a stream would allow us to purify ourselves of physical impurity, and so forth. So we have this practical aspect that I have to have a knowledge of what I need to do and what I need to believe, and that's something that all of us are required to have. We can't simply rely and say, well, whatever he believes, I say whatever he says. If I have a question, I'll just ask him, ask her. Right? Rather, I need to have that knowledge, and that's what Islamic literacy is all about. In trying to build this Islamic literacy, we have difficulties in our community. We have a lack of institutions for gaining this Islamic literacy. I've notes on there as well to guide you and to guide me through the talk. So we have Sunday schools, weekend schools, we have to some extent Islamic schools that work on our children, and to a greater or lesser extent do some work to try to increase their literacy at least. Now, efficacy, curriculum, all that stuff, those are all things that have to still be worked on more to get them up to par, so they actually give our kids literacy by the time they graduate. But there at least are institutions that are working on it and actively working on it. The Sabah Center, with which Brother Sami is involved, they're one of the leading kind of institutions that is working on this kind of a thing. But once and then on the other extreme, we have the hawzat, right? These seminaries that work for specialists who want to now devote themselves to Islamic studies exclusively, and so then that's a whole different ballgame. But what about people in the middle who are no longer kids and don't want to become specialists? Where do they go? Typically speaking, our community has the institution of speeches through majalis and khutbat, jumu'ah, and these kinds of things, these are kind of one-off speeches that we attend, sometimes if we're lucky a series of speeches, but they're still kind of, in a way, random, in a way, not contiguous, not part of a curriculum that's going to lead you from point A to point B and get you to Islamic literacy. For converts, we have a huge dearth of resources in this way. So this is one difficulty. One of the problems that we have in our community when we're trying to work to Islamic literacy is that we don't have the institutions just yet to do this. Even if you have a class and you offer a class, if I live here in Chicago, if I offer a class locally, my audience is very limited. And to have something like this, to have it sustainable, you have to have a critical mass of people. The public school system works because it's compulsory, it's mandatory, it's illegal for you not to send your kids, at least up to a certain age, to school. You have to send them. Everyone has to pay their property taxes, and so the whole system is sustained in that way, and it's a sustainable system, made so by law. But if you have a class that's offered and the audience in your community is a couple of hundred people, a couple of thousand people, out of whom there's always a very small fraction that's interested in classes, out of whom there's a smaller percentage that is committed to classes, out of whom there's even a smaller percent that will actually attend the classes, then you end up with 2 people in your class. And so the sustainability of something like that is not there because the critical mass is not there and the efficacy is not there. Logistics are also a huge problem. Geography, if I live here, then how are you in Dearborn and you in other places going to access those classes? And then financial sustainability. Like I said, the public school system demands that people pay their taxes and it can then support the whole system, which is an extremely expensive system, but it's sustained by the whole system. It's supported by the law itself. But how do you sustain something like this if you're not going to constantly need donations and funding from community so that it can kind of push itself forward? The solution I came up with a few years ago, recite one salawat, please. The solution I came up with a couple of years ago was to combine a couple of ideas that would help to solve these problems, to hybridize these few different institutions that we already have. One is a kind of madrasa, an Islamic institution of learning, where after Sunday school, for adults, whether they're converts or whether they're born into Islam, where people would be able to come and access Islamic knowledge in a systematic way and build out literacy, even if they have their own lives, they have their own areas of expertise and their own own things that they do, but somewhere in that schedule of the day, they want to make sure they're also regularly attending to their Islamic knowledge. So we have a traditional madrasa. Another component to hybridize with that is a Khan Academy. So many of you are familiar with Khan Academy. So this is a relatively new thing that's come up, where you have recordings of lectures on different topics, almost like a library of tutorials through very simple technology, almost kind of purposefully, strategically simple technology, where it's just a simple blackboard and a person writing on it and a simple voice, no fancy technology, no fancy graphics, but extremely efficacious and freely available. And it gives rise to what's called a flipped classroom, where now many schools are practicing this, where instead of traditionally where the teacher would stand up and say, okay, today's lesson is such and such, and go and give you a whole lecture or a whole thing about what the topic was, you would already do that at home. The night before, she would say, look, watch this video on Khan Academy, and the students would all watch the lesson, learn the material, get the whole lesson from Salman Khan, and then, not Salman Khan, the Bollywood person, Salman Khan, Sal from Khan Academy. They would get the lesson, and then they would come in the next day already having been exposed to the material, and now they can sit down and practice, go through worksheets, go through projects, do something with it, and now you have the teacher as your tutor, and he or she can help you to go through that material. So the flipped classroom was an idea that I thought of to kind of bring into this. MOOCs was another part of the mix. Mass open online courses like Coursera and others as well. Similar to Khan Academy in some ways, where you have pre-recorded lectures by top-notch university professors that are now freely available. You sign up for a course, you get a regular university course. Right now it's for free. Most of them don't charge, as far as I know. But it's a curriculum. You have a 15-week semester or whatever, and you go through and you get material, you get lectures, you get homework, you have quizzes and these sorts of things. So there are elements in all of this that I thought we could use. I put my own twist on some of it. So with Khan Academy, one of the deficiencies that would be there for what I wanted to do was that you have freely available stuff that's out there, a whole index of things that's available. But now, what about direction to know where to start and where to end? What about motivation? Because one of the huge factors that we have to deal with, especially with optional education, not compulsory education, with optional education, it's all about me motivating myself. And as soon as I lose my motivation or something else comes up at work or at school or my life that's more pressing, then this gets pushed aside. So how can you motivate yourself and have a system that motivates the student to keep going? Khan Academy, so far as what I've seen, doesn't have that sort of system. Coursera does. Coursera, MOOCs, they have a system that pushes you forward. You have to complete this much work by this week, submit something, and then you get the next week's material. But you have no personal interaction there. With Coursera, at most you have chat boxes where you can go back and forth. You have another 100,000 colleagues around the world who are also communicating with your teacher. And that's a very difficult sort of social media experiment that they're doing. But you don't have personal contact with your teacher, which is extremely important with Islamic learning, especially when you're formulating your beliefs and trying to clarify things to make sure you understand it correctly. You want to make sure that you have, and you need to bounce it off someone. You need to be able to say, this is what I've understood so far, and have the person say, no, that's wrong, this is what it should be. Here's where you're wrong. So the solution was to kind of mix all this stuff together and come up with what's now formed into Islamic literacy. So IslamicLiteracy.org is a website that offers classes for adult education, continuing learning for both converts and born Muslims. Some of the courses, many of the courses are geared towards exactly Islamic literacy, getting to that point where we now have a baseline that all Muslims must have just to be good Muslims, not even to be scholars, just to be a good Muslim. You have to have this kind of knowledge. And then some of the classes are for more, because there are certainly people who have the literacy and don't necessarily want to specialize and go into the hawza, but they do have a thirst to learn more and more. And so there are courses like that as well. So basically, a basic course structure would be like, for instance, I've put some of the course offerings up here. So Islam 101, 102 was one of the first. There's a sister who just passed away. Many of you in Dearborn will know her, Sister Faith Intishari. So she and a group of other converts, they actually inspired me to start Islam 101 many years ago. We were trying to think, how can we reach out to converts and provide them with something? And so they said, we wish we had this 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and we converted. And so we came up with the idea, and I developed the course, and then it's grown into what it is now. But it's basically a course that takes you through all your basic beliefs, all your basic practices. In a 2-semester system, on a weekly basis, you listen to lectures in that flipped classroom. I have pre-recorded lectures that I give you. You listen to it. You follow along with the notes. So you learn the material ahead of time. You can listen to it multiple times if you want. And then you come into a live class with myself or one of my other teachers. And here you can now bounce off your understanding. They can quiz you and see, did you understand this? What did you get from this? Especially when you're trying to formulate your belief in God and the arguments for His existence, His basic attributes, the authenticity of the Quran and the authenticity of the Prophet and the Imams. So these are things that are not, you can't just listen to one lecture and say, okay, I got it, I understand it. Right? You have to be able to articulate it yourself, practice talking and saying it, and then once you say it, then you realize what you don't understand. Right? If you were to kind of just listen to my lecture, you'll say, yeah, I got it. But now if you try to go and summarize it for someone else when you go back to your room, then you'll realize that, oh, actually he said something, this is what he said, but now it doesn't make sense because it doesn't fit with something else. And all of a sudden, when you start to articulate yourself, you realize all the deficiencies in your own understanding. Right? That's what real learning is. You do that, and now you have someone who can correct you and improve your understanding. Then you try it again, and you get it better. So through that dialectic back and forth with student and teacher, that's where you start to develop learning, not simply through listening to a lecture. So there are these different courses that are being offered. There's a sign-up that's going around just for the mailing list. The new semester has just started. So one of the things that's important about Islamic literacy is that I've tried to develop an ethic of seriousness about learning. One of the characteristics of many Islamic institutions is that people sometimes don't take them seriously. We ourselves don't take them seriously, especially if there's something that requires punctuality. Many times Muslims are deficient in Islamic activities where they're not deficient in other activities. In terms of commitment, oftentimes when I had live classes before in a local community, you'd have a lot of excitement at first where 30 people, 50 people would show up, and then by the third, fourth class, it dwindles to a couple of people, and then by the end, maybe you have 1 or 2 people left. So with Islamic literacy, what we decided to do was to really demand people's total commitment. You pay for the class, and you now commit to attendance. And it's a very small thing, but it ends up becoming very big. If you're allowed to miss 1 class per semester. So out of 15 weeks, you can miss a class. If you miss a second class, we kick you out. Right? No question. So at 1 free, you can miss it for whatever reason you want. Just because you're tired, you can miss it. But the second one, then, without exception, you're kicked out. And what's happened over the years is that this past semester, out of 150 students that we had in the semester, only about 6 people were removed for attendance issues, which is incredible. We started out with 50% would be kicked out by the end of the term. So now six people out of 150, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's less than like 3-4%. That's a pretty good attendance. So people are responding. They themselves now take it more seriously. Before they sign up, they know they have to pay for one thing. That's one commitment. But now they also know that they don't want to disappoint the teacher. They don't want to be kicked out. And so they'll plan ahead of time. People will arrange their work schedules, their life schedules for the whole semester to make sure they can attend. So it begins this whole transformation in your lifestyle where you can now attend this class and it becomes a central part of your life. Islam 101 and 102, this would be a great class. It's a great class for converts, and I originally designed it for converts. But there was one individual, many of you know him, he was recently elected in Dearborn as I think a council member, Dave Abdullah. So he took the first class I offered. He showed up. It was a convert class. He showed up, and then they're all white people, black people, and he comes and I don't know if I'm in the right place. And I said, yeah, I don't know if you're in the right place either. And then he asked if I would make an exception and let him stay in the class. So I made him agree that as long as you pretend like you don't know anything, don't ask any questions that are outside of the bounds of what we're studying right now, then you can stay. And he loved the class. And when he loved it so much that he wanted to take it again. He got his whole real estate team to all take the class too. And then that gave me inspiration to say, like, this is also a good class for Muslims. So now we've had hundreds of students over the last couple of years take this course. I think I've probably taught it 6 or 7 times now. And it's really, I think, helped people to solidify their beliefs and come away with a feeling that now I understand kind of what Islam entails from beginning to end. I don't know everything. I don't have the depth necessarily, but I have really solid foundations in those things that are most essential. And most importantly, what you get is a file folder where you now know all of the different compartments, all the different folders with labels. So now when you listen to a random lecture, a random majlis, a random khutbah, and you get one idea about something, now you have the grand scheme of things, and you know where does that one piece of information fit into the grand scheme. Whereas if you're just going along, trotting along, and you listen to this random lecture and that random lecture, you have no clue how does this piece fit into the grand scheme. So having the overall picture is so important for that. And so that's one of the goals of this program. So inshallah, I hope this helps you not only to know about this organization, but also to be motivated to take this whole journey seriously. The other brothers have talked about educational aspects in our community. Taking your own education is extremely important. Many times adults, parents will say, well, it's for my kids. Let me buy an English book because it'll be good for my kids. Oh, there's an English lecture, it's good for my kids. Well, you need to do something good for yourself as well. Don't kind of write yourself off and say, I'm too old to learn. I can't be taught because I'm already 30 years old and 50 years old. Many of my students are 60 and 70-year-olds, and they have decided that they need to relearn everything and take Islam 101 because all they've ever learned is just from random lectures here and there and from parents and Sunday schools. So they need to rebuild their understanding before the grave to make sure that they go out on the right foot, right? So we have a lot of people who are like that, who are extremely commendable, and they go against this idea that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. They've learned very well and transformed their lives by learning right from the basics. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.